On a quiet autumn morning, Officer James thought it was just another routine patrol, but a tiny puppy kept darting behind his squad car, refusing to leave his side. Every time James tried to walk away, the little dog barked and followed, its eyes pleading for help. Something about the pup's determination felt different, urgent, almost desperate. What began as a simple encounter would turn into the most heart-stopping case of his career. What was the puppy trying to show him? The answer would change everything. Morning sunlight filtered through a soft mist as Officer James rolled along the quiet country road. The day had just begun, the world still wrapped in the hush of dawn. Birds trilled in the treetops, and the steady hum of his cruiser was the only other sound. After a week of late-night disturbances and paperwork, this peaceful patrol felt like a welcome break. He sipped his lukewarm coffee and scanned the empty road ahead, expecting nothing more than the occasional speeding car or a stray deer crossing. Just as he rounded a bend near the old wooden bridge, a small blur darted onto the shoulder. James instinctively tapped the brakes. At first he thought it was a squirrel, but as the figure steadied in the road's dust, he caught sight of a tiny puppy, no bigger than a shoebox, standing stiffly on its wobbly legs. Its fur was a patchwork of black and caramel, ears perked like little flags. The puppy tilted its head, eyes wide and intent, watching the patrol car as if it had been waiting all morning. James pulled over and stepped out, boots crunching on gravel. The puppy didn't run. Instead, it took a cautious step forward and gave a single sharp bark. "Hey there, little buddy," James said softly, lowering himself to one knee. The puppy's tail twitched but didn't wag. Something in its posture, alert, almost urgent, made him pause. Usually strays either bolted or bounded with reckless friendliness. This one seemed to have a mission. He glanced up and down the road. No houses within sight, no vehicles parked along the edge. The mist was lifting now, revealing empty fields on both sides. James scanned for a collar or tag but saw none. The puppy barked again, louder this time, and inched closer to the tree-lined path that disappeared into the woods. Then it looked back at James, eyes shining as if to say, "Come on." A faint chill crept over him despite the warming sun. This wasn't the usual stray dog encounter. Something about that steady gaze and purposeful stance told him the morning's quiet routine was about to change in a way he couldn't yet imagine. James rose slowly, brushing dust from his uniform, expecting the puppy to scamper off once he moved. Instead, the tiny creature followed his every step, paws patting determinedly over the gravel. He walked back toward his cruiser, testing a theory. The puppy trotted right behind him, matching his pace with surprising resolve. When James stopped, the puppy stopped. When he turned, the puppy turned, its bright eyes never leaving his. He knelt again and offered his hand, palm open. "You lost, little one?" he murmured. The puppy sniffed his fingers but refused to relax. No tail wag, no playful bounce, only a soft whimper that seemed to plead for something more than comfort. James glanced at the empty fields and the silent woods beyond. There was no farmhouse, no distant figure calling for a pet. The air felt heavier now, thick with a quiet urgency he couldn't explain. Thinking hunger might be the issue, he grabbed a protein bar from his patrol bag and broke off a small piece. The puppy sniffed it, gave a quick lick, and backed away as if food were the last thing on its mind. Instead, it spun toward the shadowed trail leading into the trees and let out a sharp, insistent bark. Then it turned back to him, head tilted, eyes shining with unmistakable intent. James exhaled, torn between amusement and concern. He checked his watch. Dispatch expected a routine status update soon. "All right," he said softly, half to himself. "Where do you want me to go?" The puppy yipped once as if answering, and took 2 steps toward the trail before stopping to look back. Something deep in James's instincts stirred, a faint echo of every moment he had ever relied on a hunch to stay alive. This wasn't random. The little dog wasn't wandering. It was leading. As a breeze whispered through the pines and the morning sun dimmed behind thickening clouds, James felt the first ripple of unease. The quiet patrol he'd expected was already slipping away, replaced by a sense that something hidden and urgent waited just beyond that tree-lined path. James adjusted the strap of his duty belt and stepped cautiously toward the trailhead. The puppy bounded a few feet ahead, then halted and glanced back, its eyes bright with urgency. Each time James neared, it scurried forward again, never too far to lose sight of him, never close enough to be caught. The behavior felt purposeful, Like a silent message he struggled to read. The morning forest smelled of damp earth and pine. Shafts of light filtered through dense branches, painting shifting patterns on the ground. James listened for the usual woodland sounds, chirping birds, rustling squirrels. But the woods seemed unnaturally still. Even the breeze had quieted, as if holding its breath. The puppy stopped suddenly, ears pricked, and gave a low whine before barking sharply at a cluster of brambles that edged the trail. Thinking perhaps the pup had a hidden den or injured sibling, James crouched to inspect the thicket. Nothing stirred inside, only leaves slick with dew. He reached into his pocket for a small bottle of water and poured a bit into his palm, offering it to the dog. The puppy sniffed but refused, backing toward the deeper trail and letting out a frustrated bark. James frowned. Hunger and thirst clearly weren't the issue. He straightened, scanning the surrounding trees. No signs of human presence, no hikers, no distant chatter. Yet the puppy's insistence carried weight, a strange determination that tugged at something deeper than logic. He spoke softly into his shoulder radio. Unit 12 to dispatch. Any reports of lost pets or hikers near Miller Creek this morning? Static hissed for a moment before the reply came. Negative, Unit 12. All clear. James released the mic, unsettled. The puppy barked once more and padded farther into the narrowing path, pausing only to check that he was following. A knot tightened in his chest. This was no ordinary stray. Something or someone was out there needing help, and the smallest creature he'd ever met seemed to know exactly where. He took a steadying breath, tightened his grip on the flashlight at his belt, and stepped after the determined little guide, deeper into the waiting woods. The trail narrowed into a ribbon of damp soil, framed by towering pines whose interlaced branches dimmed the daylight. James moved carefully, each step muffled by layers of fallen needles. The puppy trotted ahead, pausing every few yards to be sure he followed, its tiny paws making almost no sound. The deeper they went, the more the outside world seemed to disappear. No road noise, no bird song, only the occasional drip of water from last night's rain. A sudden glint on the ground caught James's eye. He crouched and brushed aside a thin mat of wet leaves. Beneath them lay a small piece of torn fabric, pale pink and frayed at one end. He lifted it gently between his gloved fingers. The material felt like cotton from a child's jacket or dress. Frowning, he scanned the trail around him. Just beyond the fabric, faint impressions marred the soft earth. Tiny footprints, too small for an adult, leading deeper into the woods. Some prints overlapped, as if whoever made them had stumbled or changed direction in haste. James felt a chill despite the humid air. This was no coincidence. Someone, likely a child, had passed through here and not long ago. The puppy circled back, sniffed the scrap of fabric, and let out a sharp bark that echoed through the trees. It then dashed forward a few feet, stopped, and barked again, eyes locked on James. The meaning was unmistakable. Come on, hurry. He keyed his shoulder radio. Unit 12 to dispatch. Possible missing person, juvenile. Location Miller Creek Trail. About half a mile in. Stand by for update. Static crackled back, but he barely heard it. Slipping the fabric into a pocket for evidence, James straightened and followed the puppy once more. Each step felt heavier, loaded with the knowledge that time might already be against them. Whatever had happened here wasn't just strange, it was urgent. The quiet morning had turned into a search, and a tiny dog had become his only lead through the darkening forest path. James quickened his pace, heart thudding harder than the soft thumps of his boots on damp soil. He pressed the radio mic on his shoulder again, hoping for a stronger signal. Unit 12 to dispatch, do you copy? I've found possible evidence of a missing child. Requesting backup and search team. Static hissed back, followed by a faint voice breaking through. Copy, Unit 12. Nearest patrol is 20 minutes out. Proceed with caution. 20 minutes. The words settled on him like lead. If a child was out here, injured, scared, or worse, 20 minutes could mean everything. James scanned the woods, every sense on alert. The puppy, oblivious to radio chatter, had moved a few yards ahead and was waiting at a bend in the trail, tail stiff, ears forward. It gave a single sharp bark, the sound slicing through the heavy air. James took a steadying breath and tightened his grip on the flashlight strapped to his belt. The morning mist had thickened into a low, silvery fog that clung to the ground, blurring the path. A squirrel's sudden dash through the underbrush made him start, a reminder of how easily nerves could trick the mind. Still, the silence after the sound felt too complete. like the forest itself was holding back a secret. He crouched to inspect the trail again. The faint footprints from earlier were fresher than he first thought. The edges hadn't softened with dew. Whoever made them couldn't be far. He marked the location with a small stick and thumbed his radio again. "Be advised, I'm moving deeper along the Miller Creek Trail. Footprints suggest we're close. I'll update as soon as I have visual." The puppy barked again, urgent and commanding. James stood, meeting the dog's intense stare. "All right, lead the way," he whispered, more to himself than to the animal. With each step into the thickening fog, a knot of unease tightened in his chest. The routine patrol he'd expected this morning had dissolved completely. Something was out there, someone small, vulnerable, and running out of time, and only a determined little puppy seemed to know exactly where. The trail wound deeper beneath a canopy of towering pines, their heavy branches knitting together like dark curtains overhead. Sunlight barely pierced the dense foliage now, leaving the path in a dusky half-light that felt more like late evening than morning. Damp earth released a deep mossy scent with every step. James tightened his jacket and switched on his flashlight, the thin beam cutting through the dimness. Ahead, the puppy padded silently, glancing back every few yards to be sure he followed. The world grew strangely hushed. No bird calls, no rustle of squirrels, only the muffled crunch of his boots and the soft patter of tiny paws. Even the breeze had stilled, the air heavy and expectant. James's ears strained for the smallest sound, anything that might explain the urgency in the puppy's movements. Instead, he heard only the occasional drip of water sliding from saturated pine needles onto the forest floor. A few minutes in, the trail narrowed and tilted downward, skirting a shallow ravine. A faint gurgle of water drifted up from below, a creek hidden in the undergrowth. The puppy paused at the bend, nose twitching, before trotting confidently down the slope. James followed carefully, gripping tree trunks for balance as wet leaves slid beneath his boots. They reached a level stretch where the air felt cooler and damp. Here, the forest floor told stories, faint prints overlapping one another, broken twigs pointing like tiny arrows, and the faint scent of something organic, almost metallic, that prickled his senses. He crouched to examine a snapped branch still green inside, a sign of recent movement. James's pulse quickened. Whatever had happened here hadn't been long ago. The puppy sniffed at the ground, gave a low whimper, then bolted a few paces ahead, tail stiff. Its sudden urgency gripped him like a silent command. He swept his flashlight in a slow arc, illuminating dense undergrowth and shadowed trunks. Nothing moved, yet the uneasy certainty settled deeper. Someone vulnerable had passed this way and might be in trouble. James drew a deeper breath, squared his shoulders, and followed the steadfast little guide deeper into the forest's dark heart. The forest deepened into a hush so thick that every sound James made, each careful footstep, every twig that cracked seemed too loud. The puppy stayed several yards ahead, pausing only to glance back with eyes that gleamed like small lanterns in the beam of his flashlight. The trail curved sharply around a cluster of mossy boulders, and when James rounded the corner, his breath caught. Just off the path, a child's bicycle lay on its side, one wheel spinning lazily as though it had been dropped mid-ride. The tiny bell attached to the handlebars glinted dully in the half-light. Beside it lay a small backpack, its zipper half open, spilling a few colored pencils and a crumpled paper snack wrapper onto the damp earth. James's heart hammered. The items looked freshly abandoned. The paper wasn't even soaked through by dew. He crouched and ran a gloved hand over the bicycle frame. No rust, the tires were still firm. This hadn't been sitting here long. The puppy padded over, sniffed the bag, and whined softly, tail stiff as a pointer. James's stomach tightened. These were no random scraps of litter. They were signs of a child who had left in a hurry, maybe in fear. Scanning the ground, he spotted faint scuffs and a drag mark leading away from the trail and into a tangle of underbrush. Branches were snapped at knee-height as though someone small had stumbled or been pulled through. A faint smear of mud, darker than the rest, streaked one broken branch. He pressed his radio mic. "Unit 12 to dispatch. I have evidence of a missing juvenile. A bike and personal belongings. Send search and rescue to Miller Creek Trail immediately. Possible abduction or injury." Static answered, followed by a clipped acknowledgement. The puppy barked sharply and dashed toward the drag marks, stopping only when it realized James hadn't yet moved. The urgency in its voice sent a shiver down his spine. Whatever lay ahead was no ordinary accident. With a final glance at the lonely bicycle, James rose, tightened his grip on the flashlight, and followed his four-legged guide into the tangled dark. The underbrush thickened as James pushed forward, branches snagging his sleeves and leaving thin scratches on his gloves. The puppy slipped through effortlessly, pausing just long enough to make sure he kept up. After several minutes of steady climbing, the trail unexpectedly opened into a wide clearing. Here the air felt cooler, still heavy with dampness but strangely motionless, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Moon-like patches of light filtered through gaps in the canopy, casting ghostly shapes across the clearing. James's boots sank slightly into the soft moss, each step swallowed by silence. He raised his flashlight and swept the beam across the space. No movement. No bird chatter. Not even the rustle of a squirrel or the croak of a distant frog. Only the steady thud of his heart and the faint sound of the puppy's breathing. The little dog padded to the center of the clearing and stopped, ears pricked. It gave a low, mournful whine, then turned in a slow circle, sniffing the air. James followed cautiously, senses straining. He called out into the emptiness, his voice low but firm. "Hello? Is anyone out here? This is the police. Call back if you can hear me." His words were swallowed whole by the forest. Not a single echo returned. The unnatural quiet made the hair on his neck rise. He crouched, scanning the ground for signs, footprints, discarded items, anything. A few broken twigs and disturbed patches of moss suggested recent passage, but no clear direction. Suddenly, the puppy darted to the far side of the clearing where a large fallen log lay half buried in ferns. It began pawing and scratching furiously at the damp soil, letting out sharp, urgent barks. James hurried over, his pulse quickening. Behind the log, barely visible in the flashlight's glow, a narrow path curved away, hidden by thick foliage. James exhaled slowly. The forest had concealed a secret trail, one that someone didn't want easily found. He tightened his grip on the light, gave the puppy a quick nod, and stepped closer. Whatever mystery waited beyond that hidden opening was no longer just a possibility. It was a certainty. James steadied his breath and parted the curtain of ferns behind the fallen log. The beam of his flashlight pierced the gloom, revealing a narrow footpath no wider than his shoulders. The ground here was soft and freshly disturbed, the soil dark with recent rain. Whoever had passed through hadn't left long ago. The puppy slipped through the gap first, turning back to give a sharp bark as if to say, "This way, don't stop." He ducked under the low branches, their damp leaves brushing his face with cold drops. The air beyond the log felt different, denser, carrying a faint metallic scent that made him tense. Each step sank slightly into the soft earth, leaving a clear print that reminded him how recent the other tracks must be. His flashlight's glow skimmed over scuffed roots and snapped twigs, all pointing deeper down the hidden trail. Halfway along, something pale caught his eye. He crouched and found a small knitted mitten, soaked but unmistakably a child's. Its pink yarn was speckled with mud, yet warm when he touched it, as if it had been dropped only moments ago. A chill rippled through him. He gently placed it in an evidence bag and keyed his radio. "Unit 12 to dispatch. I've located a child's mitten along an unmarked trail behind Miller Creek clearing. I'm proceeding deeper. ETA backup." A burst of static answered, followed by a faint reply. "Backup en route. 10 to 15 minutes. James exhaled slowly. 10 minutes could feel like forever if a child was in danger. The puppy waded ahead, body taut, tail rigid. It gave a low growl that quickly turned into a sharp, commanding bark. James flicked his flashlight forward and caught sight of more small footprints pressed into the damp soil, their edges crisp. Whoever they belonged to was close. He tightened his grip on the light and adjusted his radio earpiece. Each breath came colder now, carrying the weight of urgency. Without another glance back, he followed the tiny guide deeper into the hidden path, every step echoing with the knowledge that the mystery's heart lay just ahead. The hidden path sloped sharply downward, winding between ancient trees whose roots twisted like knotted ropes across the ground. James placed each step carefully, but the soil was slick from the previous night's rain. The puppy darted ahead with effortless agility, pausing to bark impatiently whenever he slowed. Above them, the sky had darkened and a low rumble of thunder rolled through the hills. Without warning, the first cold drops began to fall, gentle at first, then a sudden sheet of rain. The narrow trail transformed in seconds, leaves glistening, soil turning to mud beneath his boots. James pulled up his jacket collar and adjusted the flashlight beam, which now sliced through a curtain of water. The puppy shook itself once, then pressed on undeterred, tail high like a tiny flag against the storm. As the rain intensified, a shallow creek appeared where the trail dipped. It hadn't been there minutes ago, but now water rushed across the path in a fast-moving stream. James tested it with his boot. Icy water surged over the sole. Beyond the creek, the trail rose again, and he could just make out the small silhouette of the puppy waiting anxiously on the other side. For a moment, he weighed his options. The current wasn't deep, but the muddy banks were slick and treacherous. If he slipped, his radio or flashlight could be lost and precious time would be wasted. Another low bark from the puppy cut through the downpour, sharp and pleading. James's jaw tightened. There was no turning back. He stepped into the water, feeling the cold bite through his uniform, each stride careful and deliberate. The stream tugged at his boots, but he steadied himself on a fallen branch and pushed forward. Within moments, he climbed the far bank, rain dripping from his cap and sleeves. The puppy greeted him with a quick, relieved whimper, then immediately set off again, undeterred by the storm. James adjusted his grip on the slick flashlight and followed. The storm had added a new urgency to the search, but the little dog's unwavering determination left no doubt. Something critical waited ahead, something worth braving the rain and rising waters to find. Rain hammered the forest canopy, drumming like 1,000 restless fingers. James pushed forward through the sodden undergrowth, boots sinking into mud with every step. The puppy trotted ahead, a determined streak of fur against the storm, its small body quivering but unstoppable. Lightning flashed far off, briefly illuminating the trail like a silver thread. Then, beneath the roar of rain and the rumble of thunder, James caught something different, a thin, wavering sound almost swallowed by the storm. He froze, tilting his head. There it was again, a faint, high-pitched cry, distant but unmistakable. His heart leapt. It wasn't an animal. It was the fragile voice of a child. "Hello?" he shouted, his voice nearly drowned out by the downpour. "This is Officer James. Can you hear me?" The cry came again, a little sharper, then faded into the hiss of rain. The puppy barked urgently, ears flat against the wind, and darted off the main trail toward a cluster of dense shrubs. James followed, adrenaline spiking. Branches whipped his arms as he forced his way through the tangled brush, flashlight beam jittering across slick leaves and twisted roots. The faint cry returned, now slightly clearer, guiding him like a beacon through the storm. "Hold on. I'm coming," he called, breath quickening. He keyed his radio without slowing. "Unit 12 to dispatch, I hear a child crying. Closing in on location. Send medics now." Static and distant confirmation crackled back, barely audible. The puppy stopped at the edge of a steep fern-covered drop and looked back, barking insistently. James peered over and saw darkness below, a hidden ravine where the sound seemed to echo. The realization struck hard. The missing child was down there, waiting for rescue against time and rain. James dropped to his knees at the ravine's edge, rain streaming from his cap as he aimed his flashlight downward. The beam revealed a narrow gully about 10 feet deep, its muddy walls slick with rushing water. At the bottom, partly hidden by tangled ferns, a small figure shifted weakly, a child, drenched and trembling. The faint cry he'd heard moments earlier now came as a thin, broken whimper. "I see you," James shouted over the roar of the rain. "Don't move, sweetheart. I'm coming to help." The puppy barked fiercely from his side as if echoing the promise. James quickly radioed, "Unit 12. Visual on missing child, approximately 7 years old. Location Miller Creek Ravine. Immediate medical response required." Dispatch confirmed, their voice strained through static. "Rescue en route. 10 minutes. 10 minutes felt like forever." The ravine walls were too wet to climb unaided, and the child's position, half lying in rising water, left no time to wait. James scanned for anything he could use. A sturdy fallen branch jutted from the ground nearby, thick as his forearm and long enough to reach the bottom. He yanked it free, testing its weight. "I need you to stay awake and look at me," he called down, lowering the branch carefully. "Grab the end if you can." The child stirred, a small hand reaching shakily toward the wood but slipping back with a frightened cry. James tightened his grip, heart hammering. "You can do this. Hold on tight and I'll pull you up. I promise you're safe now." He inched the branch closer until it touched the child's fingers. Above them, the puppy whined anxiously, its paws scrabbling at the muddy edge, as if urging both of them not to waste a second. Rain pounded the ravine as James braced his boots against the slick earth, gripping the heavy branch with all his strength. "That's it, wrap your hands tight," he urged, voice firm but gentle. A small, mud-smeared face lifted toward his light, wide, frightened eyes staring up through the downpour. The child couldn't have been more than 7. The branch quivered as the child clung to it with trembling fingers. "Don't let go," James called, leaning back with all his weight. Inch by inch, the small body began to rise, water streaming from soaked clothes. Mud sucked at the child's shoes, making every movement a struggle. The puppy barked from above, sharp and urgent, as if lending its own strength to the rescue. Halfway up, the branch slipped an inch, jolting them both. James's heart lurched. "You're okay. I've got you, just hold on," he shouted, adjusting his stance and pulling again. Muscles burned as he fought the slick ground and pounding rain. Finally, with a final desperate heave, he dragged the child high enough to hook an arm around their waist and lift them over the rim. They collapsed together on the muddy forest floor. The child sobbed against his chest, cold and shivering, but alive. "You're safe now," James whispered, brushing wet hair from the small forehead. He pressed his radio. "Unit 12. Child is secured, conscious but hypothermic. Immediate medical evacuation needed." The puppy bounded over, whining softly as it sniffed the child, tail wagging with relief. James looked down at the loyal little creature, awe stirring beneath his exhaustion. Without this brave dog, no one might have known where to look until it was too late. As James checked the child for injuries, something caught his eye. Beneath the muddy jacket, a thin trail of dried blood ran along the child's sleeve. Carefully rolling it back, he found a shallow gash, likely from a sharp rock in the fall. He covered it with a clean bandage from his kit, all while keeping the shivering child close for warmth. Above the treetops, faint sirens pierced the storm. Help was on the way. James held the child tighter and glanced at the puppy, whose unwavering eyes seemed to say what words could not. This rescue wasn't chance, it was meant to be. The wail of sirens grew louder, threading through the storm until flashing lights flickered like distant beacons between the trees. James exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Hear that?" he whispered to the child huddled against his chest. "That's help coming for you." The little one stirred faintly, eyes half open, lips trembling but alive. The puppy paced in tight circles, barking in quick bursts that seemed to guide the rescuers toward them. Within minutes, the glow of headlamps broke through the mist as 2 paramedics and a fellow officer emerged from the woods, rain gear gleaming under their lights. "Officer James?" one called out. "We have medical! Here!" James answered, raising a hand. Relief washed over him as the team knelt beside them, swiftly unwrapping blankets and checking the child's pulse and breathing. "Mild hypothermia but stable," one medic confirmed after a quick exam. "We'll warm and monitor on the way." James eased the child into the medic's arms, reluctant to let go even for a moment. The child whimpered softly, clutching his sleeve. "It's okay," James reassured, brushing a muddy strand of hair from the small forehead. "You're safe now. I'll be right behind you." As the paramedics prepared the stretcher, the puppy padded closer and nuzzled the child's cheek with a gentle whine. The little one's fingers twitched weakly toward the tiny rescuer. One of the medics paused, shaking his head in quiet admiration. "This little guy led you here?" James glanced down at the drenched pup, whose eyes shone with unwavering focus. "He never gave up," he said, voice tight with emotion. "Not for a second." The team lifted the child onto the stretcher, wrapping the blankets snugly. James followed close as they made their way back along the slippery trail, the puppy trotting at his heels like a steadfast shadow. Rain eased to a soft drizzle, as if the forest itself was exhaling relief. When they reached the waiting ambulance, the child was gently loaded inside, monitors beeping softly. James paused at the open doors, exchanging a final look with the brave little dog. Its tail wagged once, slow and deliberate, as if acknowledging a job well done. The hospital waiting room was quiet except for the soft rhythm of rain against the windows. Hours had passed since the frantic rescue, yet James still felt the forest in his bones. The cold mud, the pounding rain, the echo of a child's faint cries. The puppy sat beside him on the vinyl bench, fur now fluffed and warm after a quick towel dry by a kind nurse. It leaned gently against his leg, a silent companion sharing the long vigil. At last, the doors swung open and a doctor stepped into the hallway, his expression calm but alert. "Officer James?" he asked. James stood immediately, heart tightening. The doctor smiled. "The boy is stable. Mild hypothermia and a shallow arm wound, but nothing life-threatening. He's sleeping now and his parents are with him." Relief washed over James like a second sunrise. He released a breath that felt days overdue. Moments later, the child's parents approached, faces pale from hours of fear now softening into gratitude. The mother clutched James's hand, her voice breaking. "They said you found him." "But how?" James looked down at the small dog curled at his feet, its eyes bright and watchful. "Not me," he said quietly. "Him." Tears welled in the mother's eyes as she crouched to stroke the puppy. "Buddy," she whispered, recognizing him at once. "You came all this way?" The father's voice trembled with awe. He must have run miles through the storm to bring help. James knelt to meet the puppy's gaze. In that moment, the weight of what had happened fully sank in. Without this brave little soul's relentless drive, a child's life might have been lost. The thought tightened his throat until words failed. The mother gently handed James a small handwritten note on hospital stationery. "We wanted you to have this," she said. In neat, shaky letters it read, "Tell the dog he's our angel." James blinked back tears, brushing a hand over the puppy's soft head. "You hear that, hero?" he whispered, his voice thick. "You're their angel." The puppy's tail wagged slowly, almost knowingly, as if it understood every word. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the night calm and clear. Inside, gratitude and quiet wonder filled the room, proof that even the smallest life can change the course of another's forever.